I'd like to acknowledge the Kamilaroi people, who are the traditional custodians of this land. I'd also like to pay respect to elders past and present and extend that respect to other Aboriginal people present here this evening. And now, if we could all be upstanding, please, for the evening prayer. Almighty God, we humbly beseech Thee to vouchsafe Thy blessing upon this council, direct and prosper our deliberations to the advancement of Thy glory and the true welfare of the people of the Regional Council and Australia. Amen. Thank you. Now I'd like to declare the meeting formally open, and we will deal with item 1, apologies and leave of absence, as we're all in attendance and there is no application for leave of absence. We'll move to item 2, community consultation. And this evening we have 3 members of the community to make representation to the council. And I will remind those community members that as this is a development application matter, they will need to advise the council of any reportable political donations made to any councillor of the council and all gifts made to any local councillor or employee of the council. So firstly, I'd like to invite Rebecca Brady to come up and make a presentation to council. At the rostrum, please, Rebecca, and if you could limit your presentation to 3 minutes, thank you. And before you start, if you could state your name and the matter you wish to speak to and whether or not you've made any of those reportable donations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, Rebecca Brady, the matter I wish to speak to is the proposed development application for the feedlot at Loombra, and I declare that I have not made any donations or gifts to any council members.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Mr Mayor, councillors, thank you for the opportunity to address the meeting this evening and to share with council the impact that the approval of the proposed development application for a feedlot at Loombra will have on my family and potentially the broader community. The feedlot is right next to the boundary fence of our property at Loombra, which our family has owned for over 20 years. We can clearly see the infrastructure as the feedlot is already in situ and built. This provides us with a very clear view and understanding of the likely impacts once it is stocked with the proposed 999 head of cattle. I'm aware that you've been provided with the bank's report, and I hope that you've had an opportunity to review that. For us, this raises serious concerns regarding the appropriateness of the site. Reviewing the conditions that council have recommended in the business papers, I cannot see how this will effectively mitigate the risks. I question the ability of these measures to prevent or minimise adverse impacts on the amenity of the surrounding community and on ground and surface water. Personally, I remain concerned for the quality of life and mental health of the residents of Pendine Lane, many of which, including my family, only just recovering from a very tough time during the drought. Should this development proceed, I can only imagine how difficult it will be to coexist with the potential odour and dust pollution. For us personally, if this development proceeds, we'll be significantly and directly impacted. Firstly, construction of the feedlot is 100 to 150 metres from our boundary fence with no buffer zone. This means approval of the development will effectively sterilise our property from any future use that we may wish to have. The developer is essentially using our property as the buffer zone with no consultation. The conditions outlined in the business paper do not address this issue at all, and I cannot see any requirements for an appropriate buffer zone to be established between our property and the feedlot. Secondly, we have a rental cottage situated, which is approximately 1,100 metres from the feedlot construction. We rely on this rental as a key source of income. The cottage is in direct line of sight of the feedlot, and there would be no amount of trees or screening that could provide a pleasant outlook. I would be interested to know how the odour could be minimised to an acceptable level, given the proximity to residents, to our sheds and work areas on the property. From our perspective, this development benefits few people and disadvantages many residents, including myself and my family. One nearby landholder and local business owner has already put their property on the market and plans to leave the area, which is really sad. A 999 head feedlot will not create significant jobs or business for the region that I can see, yet it will compromise the environment and destroy the quality of life of many residents. I have to wonder if this is what the council really want or has in mind with the New England Regional Plan 2036. Will Loomba be fitting the vision of a healthy environment with pristine waterways, with an attractive and thriving community? What do we really truly value? And I hope it is those things. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Brady. Councillors, the second community member to represent to council this evening is Mr Wayne Collison. If you could come forward, please. Thank you, and once again, if you could state your name and the matter you wish to speak to, and whether or not you've made any political donations to the council.
My name is Wayne Collison, and I wish to speak about this proposed feedlot development at Loomba, and no, I haven't made any political donations.
Thank you.
I'd also like to table a couple of documents, being the Banks report and his letter that goes with that. A couple of copies of those, and there's a copy of my speech there as well. I can do that. So, don't know what I do with them.
Just asking them. Thank you.
I would also just like to ask before I start, given the importance of this issue to ourselves, my speech runs just a little bit over the 3 minutes. I was wondering if I might have another half minute or so in my.
No, I'm sorry, Mr Collison. I think we've got a very large business paper. The matter's been quite strongly dealt with, unless my fellow councillors are...
Mr Mayor, you just need a suspension of standing orders to
move that.
do that.
I'll second that.
Okay, there we go. So, councillors, could we just have a motion then to suspend standing orders, move Councillor Wilson, Councillor Betts, to allow an extra half minute? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Just need to vote on that.
Oh yes, could we have a vote? Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr Mayor, dear councillors, my name is Wayne Collison. My family has lived, worked and owned land at Loomba since 1909. Today we are surrounded by neighbours on small properties in a thriving community. The proposed feedlot is not in the middle of nowhere. Loomba is not a broadacre farming area. A Northern Daily Leader article in August quotes a prominent local resident as stating that Loomba is densely populated. If you wanted to establish a feedlot categorised as an offensive industry, wouldn't you first pick a property away from close neighbours? Wouldn't you also check that the land can cope with effluent irrigation? Wouldn't you worry about groundwater pollution? All of this before spending money on building permanent structures? Site selection doesn't seem to have been given any priority in this instance. To quote the New South Wales Planning Guidelines for Intensive Livestock, some development proposals may ultimately be unacceptable to excessive environmental risk or legitimate community concerns. Dr. Robert Banks, who's an independent consultant soil scientist and has over 30 years of experience in the assessment of land for feedlots, states that version 7 of the SOEE does not meet the required environmental characteristics for the operation and management of a feedlot, and the proposal should be rejected. Quoting Dr. Banks, because of the shallow soils, the potential for ground contamination on site cannot be managed. There's potable quality groundwater adjacent to and downstream of the proposed development. There is no practical way to develop soil depths over fractured rock in the area. Tamworth Regional Local Environment Plan specifies that TRC must take into account the adequacy of the information provided in the SOE and the potential for pollution. Dr. Banks states that the odour analysis contained in the SOEE is incorrect and does not take cold air drainage factors into account, which can transport odour for tens of kilometres during cold months, exposing many more receptors than estimated. Are we going to be bullied into believing that issues which are inherent in the proposed location, such as shallow soil and cold air drainage, are issues that can be controlled and mitigated? Despite soil type and depth that can't be changed, the council development team has recommended development consent subject to 93 conditions. I believe that issues raised by local residents, including buffer zones, odour and potential ground and surface water contamination are not dealt with. In the last 18 months, the applicant hasn't appeared to follow the rules and take neighbours into consideration. This gives us no guarantee that the environmental and the Loomba community will be protected. How will an operation and environment plan be effective if rules aren't followed and enforced? I'm not the only one to think that Loomba is not an appropriate site for this proposal, and in amongst that is a petition addressed to the councillors and signed by over 500 people. Wouldn't it be the right thing to prevent the pollution rather than to risk enabling a potentially polluting industrial scale feedlot in one of our prime rural lifestyle areas? If approved, this inappropriately sited feedlot will not go away, and local residents will have to live with issues such as stench every day and every night forever. Why would you impose that on us? What have we done to deserve that? Dr. Baines, who's prepared the report for it, is a highly regarded consultant whose expert opinion TRC consults in relation to its effluent reuse farm. So he has the qualifications to know what he's talking about. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Collison. And councillors, the third member, firstly, could we have a motion to resume standing orders? Thank you, Councillor Betts and Councillor Inglis. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? The motion is carried. So, Mr. O'Halloran, could you please come forward to make your representation? And once again, Mr. O'Halloran, you're well aware of the obligations and the rules that we require. Could you please state your name and whether you wish to speak to and whether
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I'm well aware. So my name's Patrick O'Halloran. I'm here to speak against the feedlot at Loomba, and no, I haven't made any donations. Okay, well, I have three submissions to place before you tonight. The first is the LEP. The second is our consultant's report. And the third is a summary for you as to why this application should be rejected. Dealing with my first submission, the LEP, all of us know tonight that the LEP is our Magna Carta. It's our framework to determine important issues relating to land, environment, natural resources on the one hand, and the needs of the developer, the landholder, the surrounding residents on the other. And intrinsic to that paradigm is water. That's right, groundwater, surface water, the existing waterways and their preservation. So if there is a risk or a potential risk of contamination, well then under the LEP you have the right to say no to this application. And our justification for that and our evidence for that is the bank's report, which you've got and you've read and you've no doubt considered. And that takes me to my second submission. Now, who is he? Who is he? Who is Dr. Banks? Well, as Mr. Collison said earlier, he's an expert. He's a specialist in feedlots. That's right. 30 years experience in feedlot applications. So if ever a person knows anything about this DA, it has to be clearly Dr. Banks. So, given that, what's his view on this? What's his take, councillors, on this? Well, rejection. Complete rejection. It's in his 14-page report. And his view is this, I'll summarise it for you. This feedlot is built on fractured rock, on shallow soil of less than 1 metre deep. And the soil is mapped as a recharge to groundwater. And so the risk of contamination is very real. Indeed, at page 14 of the Banks report, 4 paragraphs in, he says the risk is highly likely. Quote, unquote, in black and white. Highly likely is the risk of contamination. So, councillors, given that, that leads you and I to this question. And it's the ultimate question. It's the $64 million question that you have to answer tonight. And it's this. Given the risk, the question is, can this risk be controlled or managed in any practical way? Banks says no. He says no, no, and no. All right. So,
Mr. O'Halloran, could you bring your presentation to a close, please? You're well over your 3 minutes. Thank you.
Well, I through you, Mr. Mayor, could we apply the standing orders again for another, perhaps, 90 seconds on such an important topic?
Yeah.
Thanks, councillors. Support for that motion? Yeah. Thank you. Move Councillor Webb and Councillor MP. Thanks.
So given the risk, the central question is, can this risk be mitigated in any practical way? Bank says no, emphatically no. All right, given that, where does that take us? Well, you have a scientist who says in blunt terms, this risk cannot be controlled, managed, or mitigated in any practical way. So, councillors, let's now turn to the business paper. I think it's page 7. Let's look at page 7, proposed condition number 8 by the Planning Committee. And I'll just read it out to you. So it's page 7, proposed condition number 8. And it says, the owner-operator shall ensure that all practical measures are taken to prevent, control, abate or mitigate water pollution. Well, wrong, and wrong. We say the planning department has made a mistake, but it's an honest mistake. All of us make mistakes. Placed in the context of the Banks report, condition 8 goes nowhere. It goes nowhere. So given that, if we can look at it just from another angle, let's look at, by contrast, other feedlots in the area. Let's go down to Bective, Corona, Kalara. There, the soil is deeper, much deeper. There, the soil is richer. And importantly, there, the soil has a high storage capacity, which means the soil can absorb the high concentration of manure that daily is going to accumulate. But at Loombra, no. At Loombra, it's the opposite. And that's what Banks says. It's the very opposite.
Mr.
Because of the
O'Halloran,
shallow
could you bring your
soils.
presentation once again to a close? You've used 2 minutes of your 90 seconds. Thank
Could
you.
I have another 90 seconds?
No, I can't.
Could I have another 90 seconds?
No, thank you, Mr. O'Halloran. You've had a fair time for your very eloquent presentation, and I think you're taking advantage of the goodwill of the council.
Well, I doubt that,
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, but thank you for your time.
So, councillors, that brings to a close the community consultation section of the meeting. We'll move on now to item 3.
Resume standing.
Oh, beg your pardon, we need to resume standing orders. Councillor Maxwell and Councillor Wilson, thank you. Those in favour? Aye. Those against? The motion is carried. That brings us now to item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. We have a move, Councillor Betts, and second, Councillor Webb. Thank you. Councillors, any matters arising from those minutes? Councillor Inglis?
Mr. Mayor, just as to the accuracy, the irony of me presenting it mightn't be missed, but I'm down as present and an apology. I actually wasn't there, so
Very clever.
I'm in the attendees plus the apologies, but I was actually an apology. So.
Thank you. Any further matters, councillors, from those minutes? If not, I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Aye. Those against? The motion is carried. And item 4, disclosures of interest. Any councillors have any disclosures? Councillor Impey.
Mr. Mayor, it's a non-pecuniary, non-significant interest in relation to item 8.3, the Traffic Committee minutes, relates to a point relating to the school that I work at during my daytime hours. Whilst it's not significant, I will choose to leave the chamber, as I have in the past for matters like this.
Thank you. Councillor Rodder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Item 7.3 and 7.4, I'd like to declare a less than significant non-pecuniary interest as there are references to my employer, Department of Planning, Industry and Environment. However, as they are planning matters, I will remain in the chamber and participate in discussion.
Thank you. And Councillor Inglis.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 9.2, declare an interest for reason that I am a Director of State Cover Mutual Limited and Tamworth Regional Council is a member of State Cover Mutual and holds a partly paid share in such entity. It's a less than significant non-pecuniary and I will remain in the meeting and participate in the discussion.
Thank you, Councillor Inglis. Any further disclosures, councillors? If not, we will move on to, we do not have any mayoral minutes, so we'll move through item 5. We have any notice of motion. We'll move through item 6 and that brings us to item 7.1. Councillor Inglis.
Mr Mayor, I'd like to move an amendment to the, report. I've issued a copy of that amendment to all the councillors, and if I can get a seconder to that copy.
I'll second that.
Thank you. So we have an amendment moved by
It's actually a motion, Mr Mayor. You haven't moved a motion, so it's not an amendment.
It'll be.
So this is actually the
Proposed motion.
The proposed motion.
Right.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Mr GM. And I've issued a copy of that to the councillors. And have I got a seconder so I can speak to it?
Yes, Councillor.
Mr Mayor, do I believe this is a good location for an intensive feedlot? No, I do not. But under our LEP, it is permissible with consent. In fact, this DA has highlighted pitfalls with our LEP regards potentially offensive industries being able to locate in inappropriate rural areas, in particular traditional farming areas typified by low-density farming operations. Be that as it may, this DA must be considered on its merits and in accordance with the rules of the day. The applicant has rights and the community has rights. To make matters a bit harder, this project from day one has been managed very poorly by the applicant, in particular by failing to consult and displaying a total disregard for the opinions of the local community. This requirement to consult was not an option, it was a legal responsibility. Due processes were totally ignored, and it concerns me greatly that if this approach is repeated into the future and becomes the modus operandi going forward, what are the implications for the management and day-to-day operations of the development? And yes, I am well aware that this concern for future operational environmental diligence is not a planning consideration. Council has received a very large number of public submissions. These submissions provide a very thorough and thoughtful analysis of the key issues. I share many of the key concerns expressed in the public submissions, in particular surface and groundwater, soil contamination and odour. I was particularly taken by a specific comment in one of the public submissions, and I quote, "I implore Council to stand on ethics, do the right thing, and reject the proposal outright. Ethics is about the choices we make and is a branch of knowledge and practice that seeks to answer a very practical question. What ought one do? For a councillor dealing with a DA, we have a statutory obligation to make lawful decisions. To reject a DA simply because we do not like it and without lawful planning grounds means the DA can be appealed in the Land and Environment Court and at significant cost to ratepayers. My role as a councillor is to determine whether the advice from council staff reports is reasonable and should be supported or varied. Are all the relevant facts and materials available to make an informed decision? Is council exercising its functions appropriately, particularly where it is possible that it proceeds to an appeal to the court? There are some who suggest that we are duty bound to follow staff advice. Whilst this is incorrect, when we do elect not to follow said advice, then it is incumbent on us to demonstrate essentially prima facie planning reasons why not. Mr Mayor, in conclusion, on balance and after consideration of all the evidence and the assessment processes, I believe that it is in the best interests of both the community and the applicant that the DA be deferred for reasons of transparency, probity and process due diligence. This deferral to enable an independent third-party industry expert to review the consent conditions and all the submitted environmental evidence, in particular the scientific data and the operational analysis pertaining to odour, ground and surface water, soils and effluent management. There are many statements in the Statement of Environmental Effects that indicate significant unknowns and uncertainties in key areas. If this DA is approved, the success or otherwise of the development will be totally reliant on the strength of the consent conditions to mitigate potential unacceptable environmental impacts. Mr Mayor, we must get this right. So that's the, and as you can see from the proposed amendment, it basically says what I said in my conclusion there. That is the deferral to get that independent expert advice on those key areas, and that the results of that and the development application be reported to the Ordinary Meeting Council in February 2022. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, do we have anyone wishes to speak against the motion? Any? Councillor Wilson?
Mr Mayor, this has been in process for more than 4 months, and I feel the community has been under stress and been under strain, incredible pressure, as has the council, and I feel that now it's almost a cop-out to defer it further. And I personally can't support the recommendation, but I think it's inappropriate to defer it. Sorry, Mr Mayor, I personally can't support the DA development, and I can't vote for the recommendation, but I also think that Councillor Inglis's recommendation is inappropriate.
Thank you. Any councillors wish to speak for the motion? Any councillors wish to speak against the motion? If not,
Against?
Councillor Rodder, yes.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm drawing on my responsibilities under Section 79C of the Local Government Act and refer councillors to Clause 5.18 of the LEP, Intensive Livestock Agriculture, specifically the potential basically it says, in determining whether or not to grant development consent under this plan to development for the purpose of intensive livestock agriculture, the consent authority must take the following into consideration. B, the potential for odours to adversely impact on the immunity of residences or other land uses within the vicinity of the site. C, the potential for the pollution of surface water and groundwater. D, the potential for the degradation of soils. And F, the suitability of the site in the circumstances. And I was going to vote against the original recommendation, and I'm inclined to agree with Councillor Wilson that I think that the residents have been probably having many sleepless nights worried about the impacted residents, that is, having many sleepless nights worried about their future in that area, and I think I'd prefer probably to deal with it. And my objection would be based on the LEP in relation to clause 5.18.
Thank you. Any councillors wish to speak for the motion? Councillor Webb.
Look, Mr Mayor, thank you. I am going to speak for the motion because there's 3 things we can do here tonight. One is we can approve the recommendation as made by the staff, and that's got a whole lot of stuff supporting that recommendation to approve it. There is also a lot of information out there that is contrary to what's in our report, and it's from some credible sources. Now, I can't say that those sources are more credible than ours, and I think the only way forward, and I do know in my own heart that I think this is in a bad spot, this place, but my head says we probably should support the motion. I do know that if we don't come up with perhaps a peer review of all of the information that we've got, all of the reports that have been put before us, then one way or another we're going to end up in front of a court. We'll end up in front of a court from the proponent's point of view, or we'll end up in the front of a court because of the community's point of view. If we do this, at least there'll be a report there that will identify some of the shortcomings or some of the well-meaning aspects of whatever has been written on this in terms of the bank's report or in terms of our report. If it's deferred, as the mover and I seconded, there is a potential for this to be deemed a refusal and then taken to the Land and Environment Court. But I do think by the time we get there, a peer review of what we've got in front of us will have been done, and another report will have been prepared that will identify where the truth lies to a certain degree. And I think that would probably it will certainly satisfy me and hopefully the community and hopefully the proponent to what's right and what's wrong. I'm not a scientist. I can't. I'm really confused sometimes when you get reports saying this and reports saying that, and there are two different people that are putting these reports together from two different organisations that are, one wants the thing to go ahead, one doesn't. So they'll all be swayed by whatever they're wanting, whoever's paying them. I think an independent report will give us some direction onto where we really do stand. And I think the community will be better served if we have a report that is completely independent of the reports that we currently have in front of us. Mr Mayor, the other two options are, we refuse it and it goes to court, or we accept the recommendation and we'll probably end up in court as well. So regardless, this is going to be a long drawn out process. I accept what Councillor Rodder and Councillor Wilson are saying. Whatever we do here tonight is not going to shorten the time frame for the residents that live out there or the proponent in terms of where they sit with this. Whatever we decide tonight is not going to be the end of it. But at least by doing this, at least by supporting deferral and an intermediate report, at least we'll all know that where we stand next time round, which will probably be in February next year. And it will be a new council, so I struggle a little bit there because that's going to be very difficult for a new council. But I think it's something we need to do because we are representing a wide community out here that are totally opposed to this, and I can understand why. But we're also got to represent the proponent who is putting forward what is really a valid application. It's very hard to make a decision, and I think the only way that we can move forward with this with some confidence is perhaps to have this peer review.
Thank you. Any councillors to speak against? Councillor Imby.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Yeah, look, I think there are a lot of truths to what's been mentioned by my fellow councillors tonight. I think if we defer it, it could end up in the court. If we reject it, it could end up in the court. If we go with the recommendations, it could end up in the court. I guess I'm thinking of from the perspective of why I'm a councillor to begin with. And I refer back to my original oath that I took on the 27th of September 2016, 5 years ago nearly. And that states that as a councillor, I should work in the best interest of the people of the Tamworth region and the Tamworth Regional Council. The councillor handbook talks about councillors representing the collective interest of residents, ratepayers and the local community. Now, when I read the report, when I listened to the members of the community out of Loomba, when I took in stimulus and information from the bank's report, and every ounce of knowledge that I have and understanding that I have as a human being on everything that is in front of me, I couldn't agree with the recommendations. I do thank the council staff for their report. They put a lot of work into that. I also thank and acknowledge also the people of the Loomba area. They also put a lot of work in what they provided us as councillors to help educate us. I'm not a feedlot expert, far from it. But I know a little bit more about them now. And I also referred to 4.15 of the New South Wales legislation for the Planning and Assessment Act 1979, where it states, and I'll read, matters of consideration general. In determining a development application, a consent authorities are taken into consideration such of the following matters as are of relevance to the development, the subject of the development application. And point B, the likely impacts that the development, including environmental impacts on both the natural and the built environments, and social and economic impacts in the locality. Point C, the suitability of the site of the development. Now, we heard from 3 members of the community. They all spoke about social impacts. One member of the community, sadly, is looking like they're selling for that reason. They look at the suitability of the site for the development. I think we all agree in this room. It's just not the right place to put it. So on those grounds, as a councillor and as a person, just an average Joe Blow in the community, I cannot agree with this type of development as it stands, and I choose not to endorse the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, we've had 3 speakers for the motion and 3 against. I'll now open the floor for any comments if you wish to make comments. Councillor Betts.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I've spent some time in local government, and this is one of the hardest DAs that has ever come before this council and any previous councils that I've been on. And I spent probably on this one probably 10, maybe in excess of 10 hours reading the documentation over and over again, and with a number of calls, many calls from the members of the community. And yes, I agree with the fellow councillors. We've really had a lot of information before us from both sides of the case, the developer and the opponents in the residents in the area. We really haven't got many areas to go in this particular DA because it meets the requirements, because it's under the threshold to require all the other environmental EISs and the associated government agencies that have their input. They just don't have their input into it. So in order to really exercise due diligence, I will support the amendment that we have a third party, because if that third party review, because if we go to the Land and Environment Court, we have exercised due diligence, because if it goes to the Land and Environment Court, as this council very well knows, it has cost us in excess of $600,000 to go to the Land and Environment Court. So this council needs to really make sure that we have the independent advice, because as we said, we've got 2 opposing views. If we can put it together and have an independent review, yes, it could trigger the deemed refusal, but it's gone past that trigger point anyway, well in excess of that time. So by the time it comes back in February, I don't think, I'm sure it won't have triggered that deemed refusal, because that report will be in and discussed, and we will have an independent, and we can really go to the broader community and say that we've really exercised our due diligence. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think pretty well everything's been said, but I have many concerns about the DA, and I won't be supporting the amendment. I believe it's the wrong development in the wrong place. Among my concerns, which are many, including odour, dust, but overall, overwhelming concern to me personally is the possible and probable contamination of both ground and underground water. We've only one aquifer. Once it is gone, contaminated, it takes a long while to cure. Mr. Mayor, I'm not comfortable in voting in favour of the DA, and as in the past, if I'm not comfortable with something, I will be voting against it.
Thank you. Any further comments? Councillor Tickle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was raised on a beef cattle property. My brother's the 5th generation on that property, and I more than understand the concerns raised, particularly those in relation to the environment, notably water. In accordance with the Tamworth Regional Local Environment Plan 2010, the subject land is located in the RU1 Primary Production Land Use Zone. The proposed feedlot is defined as intensive livestock agriculture, which is permissible within this zoning. We could have a lot of poultry sheds in this zoning, which is that desirable? Probably not. I've taken all the concerns raised very seriously, and I thank the community for raising those with us. And I've examined the reports provided to us, and the council reports, and again thank the staff for that thorough research. As you know, this has been going on for a long time. I've also taken into account, as Councillor Inglis mentioned, our statutory obligations as a council, the Tamworth Regional Council. And that is to be representing and upholding our responsibilities to the entire Tamworth Regional Council community. So in reaching a decision on this very important motion, we have to be very mindful of the entire community. As for my fellow councillors, I've agonised over this development proposal and I've asked myself the following. Is this ideal for a cattle feedlot? And the answer is no. Is the development permitted under the current zoning? Answer is yes. However, the application has revealed, as Councillor Inglis pointed out, an inadequacy in our zoning which we need to be addressing. Another question, is the development compliant? The answer, in consideration of the detailed and well-researched reports we have before us, the answer is yes. If the application is defeated outright this evening, the applicant would be very likely to appeal the decision in the Land and Environment Court and win at a very high cost to Tamworth Regional Council ratepayers. If it is passed, the opponents are going to appeal, or would expect would appeal. So either way, as has been pointed out, this is very likely to end up in the Court of Appeal. So in light of all that, I support the proposed amendment to have an independent report presented to us. Indeed, Dr. Panks has presented some what would appear, some very valid and certainly well-researched comments. So in order for Tamworth Regional Council to perhaps make a more definite decision on this or a recommendation, I certainly support the recommended amendment before us.
Thank you, Councillor Tickle. And councillors, I will now put my position for the record. I won't be supporting the amendment because I have a slightly different view of my role as a councillor. I'm happy with supporting the recommendation of the staff, and with one minor exception, which was of concern to me, and had I had the opportunity to pursue that through the meeting, I would have sought to have some dust mitigation for those residences close to the road. However, this is one of the wonders of democracy. We've got one Local Government Act, we've got one Code of Conduct, we've got one Code of Meeting Practices, and in this room we've got about, I think, 5 different interpretations of that information. So the joys of democracy's councillors, but my position is I won't be supporting the motion. And as we've all had under our Code of Meeting Practice, we've had 3 speakers for the motion, 3 speakers against the motion. I've gone as far as affording each councillor the opportunity to make representation and have comment on the motion. I'll now afford the opportunity to make a closing comment to the move of the motion. Councillor Inglis, if you choose to close the debate.
Yeah, just to say, Mr. Mayor, this amendment is about due diligence. It's about just ensuring that we do our due diligence. So if it does end up in court, that's a good thing. If it doesn't end up in court, it's a good thing. It's actually in the applicant's interest and the council's interest to get this independent review done, because it isn't just about reviewing the data, it's also about the conditions of consent. It's just simply about due diligence, and it's incumbent on us to make sure that we do that, particularly when we voting on, what is clearly something that's very controversial. We need to be able to look the community in the eye, so when they say to you whether you voted for it or against it, did you do everything that you could do to come to your conclusion about what you felt about this? And for me right now, I can't do that because enough hasn't been done. So it's about due diligence, Mr Mayor, and I encourage the councillors to vote for the amendment. Another couple of months isn't going to make one scrap of difference, and yet it's a process that can put everyone in a much better position.
Thank you, Councillor Inglis. Councillors, I'll now put the motion, and as we all understand, with a development application we need a show of hands. So those in favour of the motion, please raise your hand. Those against the motion, the motion is lost. Thank you. So, Mr General Manager, some advice please, as that was the motion we had to be before us. Where do we go from here?
Well, somebody has to move a different motion, Mr Mayor, either the motion that was recommended by the staff or a motion to reject the development application. You basically voted to now not defer it, so you have to make a decision as a yes or a no to deal with the matter.
Thank you. So, councillors, could we maybe consider, would somebody be in a position to move the motion so that we can actually deal with the motion as printed and either support or reject it? Moved Councillor Webb and seconded Councillor Tickle. So, Councillor Webb, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Not straight off, I'll have a closing comment.
Thank you. Any councillors wish to speak against the motion? Councillor Wilson?
Mr Mayor, this is a complex and difficult issue and it weighs heavily on all of us. We've already established that. The planning department's been professional, they've been thorough, they've sought confirmation and advice from state agencies and authorities. We've had consultations and workshops that have been appropriate and transparent. The conditions and the controls that have been applied to the recommendation are significant, from construction through to ongoing use, in order to minimise the impact of the agricultural function and lifestyle on the surrounding properties and also the environment. FIAC, along with council, would also function as an auditing authority should it go ahead. However, I cannot support the recommendation. This feedlot is being constructed in the wrong place. It was permissible initially as a temporary emergency drought measure. However, it is unfortunate that a DA was not lodged once this changed to a permanent development and work commenced. Down the track, with new planning that is happening in our wider community, it will also not be permissible in this area. So do I agree this area is a product of timing? Why I'm choosing to vote against this recommendation. One, the long-term contamination of the soil, a build-up of nutrients and salts beyond the immediate area from the intense annual operation. Contamination by surface water. The second one, long-term contamination of water courses and a build-up of nutrients. Reedy Creek and Sandy Creek, of course, joins the Peel River. And of course there's odour. But the precise long-term impost on the environment is unknown. We've had reports from Dr. Banks that indicate the shallow soil and the issues that causes. But many examples of long-term impact and degradation from these sorts of developments do exist. Mr Mayor, part of our responsibilities as a council is to make decisions, and I've never balked at a hard decision. This is a hard decision. It's hard because the planning regulations here have got it wrong. This is the wrong place for a feedlot. It will impact negatively on neighbouring properties. It will inject elements into the natural environment that have proven to negate the soil and water balance. In response to my community and environment, I have to respond to responsibilities that sit beyond the current planning regulations because they will not deliver what I believe will deliver the result and the best result in the long-term outcome. I also concur with Councillor Impey's report in New South Wales legislation under development and assessment consent, matters for consideration in determining a DA, 415B, the likely impacts of that development, including environmental impacts on both natural and built environments, and social and economic impacts on the locality and the suitability of the site for the development. If this development goes ahead, I feel it will create environmental issues for the surrounding properties and for future generations to have to rectify it.
Thank you. Councillor speaking for the motion. We have no councillors speaking for. I'd like to speak for the motion. I believe that if I was being asked here tonight, is this an appropriate place to put a feedlot? Is this a suitable place to put a feedlot? I would absolutely say no, but my principles and my understanding of the planning legislation, my understanding of my responsibility to the community doesn't allow me to have the luxury of that opinion. So I will be voting for the motion. Thank you, councillors. Now, any other councillors wish to speak against? Councillor Rodder.
Mr Mayor, I'd like to move an amendment. If I would have a seconder, I'll speak just in relation to the LEP and clause 5.18. I'd like to put an alternate motion.
What is the alternate motion?
The alternate motion is council in relation to DA 2021-0254 for change of use feedlot, not grant development consent subject to the provisions of the LEP 5.18 and specifically B, C, D and F.
Mr Mayor, you can't move a motion that's a direct negative to the motion in front of you. That's not an amendment. You'll have to defeat the motion and foreshadow that as an alternate motion.
Thanks. So, any other councillors speaking for the motion? If not, I'll now open the floor for comment. Councillor Tickle.
Sorry, I'll go a bit slowly. Thank you, Mr Mayor. I refer back to the original points I made, and I'm disappointed that we can't have that independent environmental report. The likely outcome here this evening, if this is defeated, the proponent will go to the Land and Environment Court with an independent environmental report. So it's going to be one report versus the other report, and I would be far more comfortable if that environmental report was commissioned by council rather than by the proponent, because we know how it all works, and we've got a solicitor in the room. They will be, no doubt, have to present a report, and who knows what that report will say. So this is likely to go on for a long time, whether we vote yes or we vote no on this evening. And I agree with what the Mayor said. We have an obligation, and the report before us is recommended that we support the feedlot. The reasons I said before, I don't agree that it's the right place either. But I'm not an environmental expert, and I'm acting on the information before us. It's been built to national standards, all the industry standards, all those boxes are ticked. And so my decision will be based on what I have before us. As I said earlier, we've been through this with poultry sheds. We wouldn't have any poultry being produced in this entire region if every councillor stood up and said, I don't agree because I think it's going to smell, or I think it's going to pollute the waters. We've had that very situation in our council chambers. And this is another one of those meetings. It's a very difficult meeting, a very difficult decision to make. As I said in my opening comments, I've raised on the land, I understand the issues, and this is definitely not an ideal site. However, from the report in front of us, which I have to base my decision on, and we've already voted down an independent environmentalist report, so I'm reverting back to this, and I'll be voting in favour.
Thank you. Councillors, anyone wishing to vote against the motion? Councillor Empey.
Thanks again, Mr. Mayor. Oh, look, I've said most of mine points, but I, you know, without risk of harking on things, I stand here tonight with my Tamworth Regional Council jacket on, here in this room, in the chamber, and I'm here to represent the people of this community. And there are several people from this community in this room who live in the Loomba area. I'm not entirely certain there's anyone here from the developers' side, but if they are, well, welcome to our chamber. My role as a councillor is to represent people, and I'm in favour of developments. In fact, I'm not anti-feedlots, as long as they're in the right place, and as long as they're not going to detrimentally affect people who live around it. And the people who live around it are the people who live in our community. The person who is developing the feedlot, I'm not sure whether that person lives in our community, but the people who live around it do. And my role, purely and simply, is to represent the people who live in our community. Now, if I'm voted out in a month and a half or so's time, because of this decision I've made tonight, my stance, well, so be it. It doesn't bother me, because at least I can walk down the main street or drive over to Loomba or anywhere else in our local regional area, and somebody says to me, what were you in council for? My role was to just support people's needs, make this region a better place to live. And having a feedlot not that far away from where you live is not going to make your place a better place to live. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillors, any further comments? Councillor Roddo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wonder how environmentally and socially robust a development could be with 93 conditions, and also how confident I could be that they would all be met. There's clearly major concerns with this proposal from contamination and odour, as outlined in the comments by scientist Dr. Robert Banks, who, look, I thought it was a fantastic appraisal of that project in that area. And it's sad that that couldn't be adopted, for consideration by the council as one of those part of the recommendation. These impacts will be serious in this area due to the site of the development, and we've seen during the most recent drought how important groundwater and surface water supplies are, and there is concerns this proposal could impact the Loomba and Tullamore Heights communities as well as the wider Tamworth community. And the residents out there are good people. I've lost count of how many times I've been out there checking out their roads, particularly Pendine Road and others adjoining that area, and certainly that will be an impact too from this development. I'm sure it will exacerbate the condition of the road. And I appeal to my fellow councillors in relation to that clause within the LEP, which provides us the perfect excuse to reject an application that we're concerned about in relation to odour and contamination, and that is clause 5.18, subsection 3, B, C, D and F. And for those reasons, and in accordance with my responsibilities under section 79C of the Local Government Act, I will be voting against it.
Thank you. Further comments? Councillor Maxwell.
I think nearly everything's been said, Mr. Mayor, but I certainly will be voting against it. I'm very concerned about the water contamination, and as I said earlier, once it's spoiled, it's spoiled, and it's in. This feedlot is on the top of a hill which sheds water both ways into two tributaries that eventually end up in the Peel River, and we're talking about water supplies and people's lives below, so I'm totally against it.
Thank you. Final comments, councillors? If not, I'll put the motion. Oh, Councillor Webb, do you wish to close the debate?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Closing comments. I think we've shot ourselves in the foot because we haven't gone with the option for review. That was the only sensible option we had here tonight. regardless of whether we support this or we don't, it's probably going to end up dragging out for many, many months and cost quite a lot of money. I think as a council though, and been there many, many years, this is probably one of the hardest ones we've had to deal with. Hard because the community out there in general are quite opposed to it for a whole range of good reasons. It is a rural activity in a rural area, but it's probably a rural activity that's probably not well placed where it is at the moment. And I can't really see that as being a good thing for that community. However, we've got a bunch of conditions here in front of us, and I think if we looked at condition 62, I went through a lot of the stuff there, and we'll be going through that if this gets approved with planning staff as we move into the future to make sure that all of this is done in accordance with what we're required. We have to sign off on that, and I will be making sure that, that we actually make sure that the monitoring of those conditions that are listed in 62, along with the others, are thoroughly met. It's very difficult. But Mr. Mayor, I would actually like to move an amendment to the recommendation, and I would like to add another dot point, 94, if someone can second my amendment. And that will be that the road in front of the three houses on Pendine Lane, that is going to be mostly traffic to gain access to this development, has sections of, is done up and has sections of seal to our staff, our engineering standards, to cater for those people that live in those houses and will be impacted on by the dust.
We have a seconder, councillors. Councillor Betts.
Mr. Mayor, it's not actually an amendment because Councillor Webb is the mover of the motion, so he's actually making an amendment to his motion. It's not a formal amendment, so with the agreement of the seconder, it'll be incorporated into what has been.
We'll have an agreement
Councillor
so
Tickle,
that we'll have those sections of road 300 metres in front of each of those residents that can be sealed, and in accordance with our council staff, engineering staff. I say to the residents out there, I don't vote on this lightly. I think this is a terrible situation that we're in. But because we've decided as an organisation tonight here, as the council has decided not to defer and seek other reports, I think we're in a situation where we have absolutely no choice but to support the recommendation put forward by the staff. We don't have a planning reason not to support that. If there was a councillor here tonight that had wanted to put forward an amendment based on planning, we could go forward with that, but nobody has been able to do that. And unfortunately, we're in the situation where I think we're in a situation where we have no choice as an organisation, a professional organisation, to approve this recommendation with the staff recommendations and the one that I've added along with the seconder. So that's about it, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. So, Council, this is due to the unusual nature of your moving of the amendment. I'll now afford the opportunity to any councillors to speak for or against that additional item on the amendment. Councillor Wilson.
Mr. Mayor, can I ask advice of the Director, please?
As to
the appropriateness of the road, I just want to know who'll be paying for that. Is that our condition or are we?
That's a condition to impose on the developer, an additional condition.
Can I have that confirmed, please?
It is confirmed, Councillor Wilson. That is actually the motion. Thank you. Any further discussion on the motion? Councillors, I'd now like to put the motion. Those in favour with a show of hands as per our code of meeting practice. Those against? Councillor Wilson, you're abstaining, so that's a vote in the negative. The motion is lost. So, councillors, that now brings us to so for those members of the public, that's effectively a refusal by the council. So the development application is denied. And if you choose to leave the chambers, we won't be offended. We've got a very long business paper here to move through, so thank you very much for your interest and your attendance. Councillors, that now brings us to item 7. Councillor, those members of the public, the General Manager has a comment.
I'd like to seek the advice of Councillor Inglis, to tell you the truth. I don't think we've actually finally addressed that matter, Mr Mayor. You've not accepted a approval of the DA, but nor have you voted on a refusal. And if you were going to refuse the development application, you have to state the planning reasons as to why it is being refused, so that we have a basis on which to defend the matter should we end up in court. You haven't resolved to defeat the DA. You've just resolved not to approve it on the basis of that recommendation.
Councillor Rodder foreshadowed.
Yep.
So,
That
Councillor
was my confusion.
Rodder, and thank you for that advice, Mr General Manager.
Councillor Rodder's got to put forward his foreshadowed motion. You have to have a replacement motion.
Councillor Rodder.
For 2 moments, Mr Mayor.
That's why I didn't vote.
Well, we were voting on the motion.
So my foreshadowed motion is that council in relation to development application number DA 2021-0254 for a change of use feedlot intensive livestock agriculture at lot 29. So all the details there appropriate, except for instead of grant development consent, deny development consent in accordance with the TRC LEP clause 5.18 subsection 3 B, C, D and F.
So, Councillor Rodder, your motion, to be clear,
Yes.
is that you are saying that the application does not comply with those sections of the LEP.
Correct.
Okay. The difficulty with this, councillor, is that unless you specifically state why you don't, or you believe it doesn't exist, the staff have already put forward an opinion to the councillors. If this ends up in the Land Environment Court, the councillors that have made the decision on a basis that they've put in front of the council will be the ones that will have to defend that, because the staff will not change their professional opinion that they've provided to the council. So you have to be able to stand in front of a court and say to them the reasons why you believe that this development application does not comply with those sections. You can't just quote the sections, you have to say why.
Okay. So in accordance with the report by Dr. Robert Banks, concerns regarding section 3, in determining whether or not to grant development consent under this plan to development for the purpose of intensive livestock agriculture, the consent authority must take the following into consideration. B, the potential for odours to adversely impact on the amenity of residences or other land uses within the vicinity of the site. C, the potential for the pollution of surface water and groundwater. D, the potential for the degradation of soils. And F, the suitability of the site in the circumstances. They are the reasons that I...
But Councillor Rodder, are you relying on the information provided in the Banks report as you're saying that the Banks report justifies you saying that the development doesn't comply on that basis? They are just conditions. There's been an assessment done on one side that says it does comply with the conditions of consent. If you're going to rely on the Banks report, you need to specifically state that, because that will be the defence that council will put forward to any court action.
Yes. Well, I would be happy to support the Banks report in relation to those clauses of the LEP.
Thank you. Councillors, just before we take a second, I would ask if the Planning Director has any comments, given that we've got some new information here, given that if there are no comments, that's fine. We don't have a seconder for the motion as yet.
Mr Mayor, the only thing I'd say in terms of Councillor Rodder's motion, it needs to say refuse the development application, not deny, to be appropriate. And I certainly think it would be better if there was some more detail, not just referring to the potential for environmental impacts, that it actually states that council considers it's an unacceptable impact, for example, and I'm not meaning to put words into your mouth, but it needs to be a bit more definitive than just say the potential, because there's a potential for environmental impacts on any application. So that I would suggest some more definitive comments if that's possible, because we will have to defend that decision. And whilst the staff who wrote the report can't, we will need, if it does end up in court, we will be looking for someone independent again, but to assist in defending council's decision. So the more definitive, that will work in council's favour.
Councillors, could I just raise a point of order here? And Mr General Manager, I'll seek your advice. If we go back to the original recommendation, the original recommendation suggests that council consider this development application listed in the preamble and grant development consent subject to the following conditions. Now, we had a motion there that considered development consent with all the documented conditions and also one additional condition. I would be suggesting that development consent was refused by the motion.
But if you are going to refuse it, Mr Mayor, you have to have a motion that states the planning reasons why it has been refused. You have to. That is a requirement of the legislation. Councillor Inglis referred to it earlier when he first spoke, that we must state the reasons why.
Okay, thank you. So is everyone clear where we are before we seek a seconder? Councillor Inglis, are you in a position
Just to, I guess, provide some comment to move it along. Everything that's basically been said is correct. You can just quote the sections within the LEP, but as the Director indicates, it is far better to actually have justification why you pick those particular sections, those 79C considerations. Councillor Otto, I think probably because you don't have that information, do you?
No, with the bank's report.
So it is, because if it does go to court, it is far better for the council by many hundreds of percent to reference the planning reasons why it's been rejected. So I would think, Mr Mayor, that for the purposes of Councillor Rotter, it might be the best for you to use those sections, those 5.18 section 3 section. I would also suggest to you that you include A, which is the inadequacy of the information provided in the Statement of Environmental Effects that accompanied the thing, and that for the reasons for each of your other 4 dot points, you would use the arguments that are referenced in the bank's report.
Okay, so we're all clear. Are we?
We need a copy of the motion, Mr Mayor.
Yeah. So
do you have a copy of the motion, Councillor Ross?
and councillors,
And Councillor Ross, are you including Part A as referred to by?
so councillors, whilst the are we able to actually?
Yeah, we're going to put it up there.
A seconder, yeah. So
We don't have a seconder yet, Mr Mayor, but we'll get the motion up on the board so everybody knows what they may or may not be seconding and voting for.
So we'll just pause the meeting, councillors, and
Can we just have a clearance? I might be totally wrong here. I thought the motion was, I thought it was 5-4 against.
It was 5-4 to not approve the motion, approve the recommendation.
I thought the motion went up in its original form.
It did.
with one amendment, but councillor Wilson abstained. She didn't vote.
No, not my intention, it's to vote against, and the same thing was achieved.
Yeah, that's all right.
Yes.
Never been in a place.
This is a copy and paste the first paragraph of the approval. Where you start typing A, then just copy that next paragraph.
It would be in that same way.
So just that council in relation to development application for DA data, take that through to redevelopment. And then just change the redevelopment. So copy that, paste that above your A. Above A, yep. Paste that. And so now it needs to say,
And that was denied. And so I thought,
This is the edit, yeah, is there if the act doesn't pair it up.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, we don't have these often, so you know,
No.
as far as foreshadowing things and
Yes.
Foreshadowing.
Councillor Rodder, I accept that, and I guess it's very unusual circumstances tonight, but in the interest of democracy, we will pursue.
ultimately they'll just be the dot points in reference to the LEP.
Councillor Inglis, that dot point A only applies to designated development.
Development needs to be deleted.
Okay, is that the list?
No, Mr. Mayor, so you also then just have to add, and don't have to be ABCDE, it doesn't matter what they say, you don't have to be using the order. With the reasons of relying on information, so the summary relying on information contained within the bank's report to support we will make this nice and tidy, Mr. Mayor, but I think that generally captures what Councillor
So
dot points B through E.
B through to E.
B through E.
Okay, councillors, we have a motion there. We don't have a seconder as yet, but I propose to stick strictly to our code of meeting practice with this debate. I think we've had enough airtime now in over an hour, so we'll just we'll have the opportunity for the speaker to speak to the motion. We'll take the opportunity for up to 3 people to speak for or against, providing we have conflicting views. So now, Councillor Roddy, you're happy with the motion as presented?
Yes,
I'll now call for a seconder. Thank you. Seconder, Councillor Impey. So, Councillor Roddy, do you wish to speak to your motion
I don't
any
think we need to
further?
go anything further.
Any councillors wish to speak against the motion? Councillors, I will speak against the motion because I think this is just, in my view, this is a recipe for disaster. I can see that, in my personal opinion, I think this has got very little hope of being supported in an appeal, and I fear for the consequences to the residents out there that they may not have the benefit of some or many of the conditions that have been recommended in the council staff. So any further councillors speaking for the motion? If not, I'll put the motion. Those in favour with a show of hands, please. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those against the motion, 1, 2, 3. The motion is carried. So thank you very much to those community members. The development application is refused. Thank you. And thanks for your patience. So councillors, we'll now move on to item 7.2, sorry. We have a mover, Councillor Inglis, and a seconder, Councillor Maxwell. Thank you. Councillor Inglis, do you wish to speak to the motion?
No, Mr Mayor.
Any councillors wish to speak against? If not, I'll put the motion. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? The motion is carried. Item 7.3. Move Councillor Rodder and Councillor Inglis, thank you. Councillor Rodder, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Just quickly, Mr Mayor, just in relation to entrance signs, I agree with the Tamworth Lau that it should recognise the Gomeroi people, and that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Any councillors wish to speak against the motion? Any councillors wish to make comment? Councillor Impey.
Mr Mayor, look, I agree there should be a lot of consideration for signage on the Oxley Highway, i.e. promoting businesses and so forth within the development, and you know, standards on the fencing. I think they're both good moves.
Thank you. Any councillors wish to speak against? If not, I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Those against? The motion is carried. Item 7.4. Move Councillor Inglis and Councillor Wilson. Thank you. Councillor Inglis, do you wish to speak to your motion?
No, Mr Mayor.
Any councillors wish to speak against the motion? Any councillors wish to make comment? Councillor Wilson, thank you.
Yes, sorry, Mr Mayor, that's been an interesting meeting. This is an exciting proposal to incorporate design excellence into the CBD. It's so the CBD is the soul of a city, and it's the part of a city that everybody feels they own. It's not owned by a shopping centre, it's not owned by an individual, it's the soul of the community. And to align our current planning with the blueprint actually gives it legs. And it's just so great to see. With there so much will be happening in the CBD, including shop top living and external information and external inquiries. Sorry, I'm still sitting on the last item. There's been so much inquiries into our CBD, and the fact that this will align with the aspirations of the blueprint is really encouraging, and I thank the department for picking this up and making sure that they're aligned together. And I'm also encouraged to see further in the report that design excellence, it will be moved out further into our general urban planning, and that's really encouraging to see, because we don't want run-of-the-mill communities, we don't want run-of-the-mill design, we want design that will really service our community well. And I also like how that will flow into Fitzroy Street. So thank you for this rather pleasant and positive report.
Thank you. Any councillors wish to speak against? If not, I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Aye. Those against? The motion is carried. Item 7.5. Move Councillor Tickle and Councillor Betts. Thank you. Councillor Tickle, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The recommendation before us represents the input from many stakeholders, including the developers and the Urban Street Tree Advisory Committee, which comprises arborists, community members and council staff. We now have an updated Urban Street Tree Management Plan and a quick guide to growing and maintaining trees. Also, within that urban street tree management plan, we have a comprehensive list of suitable street tree species, separate list for suitable park tree species. All of these have been revised, taking into account the drought and what lasted during that and what didn't, and of course many other factors. So there is a comprehensive guide there, and I thank the staff for taking this now to the next step, which was a recommendation from our Urban Street Tree Advisory Committee, is in that we must get it right in subdivisions. And so to that end, we see the proposed changes to the engineering guidelines, and as mentioned just before, we have already had a lot of input from the developers who have expressed their frustration into the process before, and of course the end result has been that somewhere those trees have been paid for in subdivisions, but we don't see any result. You know, we should have had green leafy subdivisions right through this council area. However, we've taken on board what has gone wrong and what hasn't worked for all parties, councils, developers, contractors, and come up with a plan which I believe will be implemented and will be sustainable. And the focus has to be on growing the right trees and maintaining them, and have in our minds that we want the tree to be there for the long term, not just to tick off the job that the tree is in the ground and walk away. Not walk away after 1 month or 2 months or 6 months. They need long-term maintenance. So thank you to everyone involved in putting this proposed amendment together, and we all look forward to a greener and cooler Tamworth region.
Thank you. Any councillors wish to speak against the motion? Any councillors wish to make comment? Councillor Betts?
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor. Just briefly, to me this is a classic example of how some initiatives, Councillor Tickle led the team with Councillor Maxwell and Councillor Wilson and the staff, but also the broader community got together, and it involved a broad cross range of people that are interested in the trees and the well-being of our climate. And I think that whole team needs to be congratulated. So congratulations to the team. Thanks, Mr.
Thank you. Any further comments, councillors? Councillor Tickle, I'd just like to acknowledge the diligent and conscientious and persistent approach you've brought to this subject, and it's something that I think we've kicked around this chamber for quite a few years, and I think your persistence has been an integral part in getting it to this stage, so well done. So, do you wish to close the debate?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, for the comments, but I also thank my fellow councillors for supporting the original motion 3 years ago, and it certainly has picked up momentum, but we're focused, as I said before, on getting it right, not just sort of ticking boxes. It's best not to have anything if we're not going to do it correctly, and I believe that we have made great progress. And I say we, meaning council and also the community. The community have come on board with this project, and they've been amazing. We've had community groups, we've had thousands of trees being planted, but we have to often pull people up and say, thank you, you're not only going to grow the tree, there is a contract you undertake, and that's 2 years maintenance on those trees. So there is a lot of glory in putting that tree in the ground. However, there is work involved in looking after it, and there's also skill involved in looking after it. And I think that we just have to continue to educate people on that. You know, this is nothing just modern. We've had trees. Look at the trees we see out the windows here. I mean, they've been there for generations, and that's what we have to work towards, and to leave a legacy for future generations.
Thank you, councillors. I'll now put the motion. Those in favour? Aye. Those against? The motion is carried. Item 7.6, move Councillor Wilson and Councillor Impey. Thank you. Councillor Wilson, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Yes, Mr Mayor, it's really good to see this group reactivated after COVID, and the developments that's happening there. group are working really well together, really positively, and have laid out a plan that will give long-term guidelines to how we want the CV to develop in the light of the university being installed, and it was encouraging to see that input there. It was also good to see that the desire to have a increased presence in the CBD was good, and I just look forward to it increasing under a new council and new momentum and new business folk moving into that area and what they'll achieve in that area.
Thank you. Any further comments, councillors? Councillor MP?
Thank you, Mayor. This is a bit left field, but I need to say it. Those who read the report would notice that I wasn't down as an apology for the most recent meeting because I'm on that working group. I had a student call me up the night before needing a reference for an application for university accommodation. So I went into work the following morning and I plumb forgot about the working group meeting. So I do apologise for that. Hopefully it doesn't happen again. Thank you.
Any further comments, councillors? Councillor
Mr Mayor, it's great to see that there's still activity happening here, and I think that our city is well known for its main street, and very well known. And if you drive down the street of an evening and the trees and the lights and the lot, it hasn't just happened. It's happened because there's been some planning and a lot of work done there. So I say thank you to those that came before us, putting that together, and thank you to those that are still doing it.
Thank you. Any final discussion, councillors? If not, I'll put the motion. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? The motion is carried. Item 7.7. Moved Councillor Wilson and Councillor MP. Thank you. Councillor Wilson, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Yes, Mr Mayor. This is another really exciting project, and it's had a lot of work put in. The recommended is a really positive outcome from the constructive working partnership that council's had with Transport New South Wales, and it's probably happened over the last 2 or 3 years, but it's a two-pronged advantage, this particular building. It means we have a significant building restored and reinstated for specific use, fit for purpose. The project manager with Transport New South Wales states that the project that he wants in this building is a project that has a strong community support, and it provides access and education and outreach. And education outreach would, because that would align strongly with the principles that the Transport for New South Wales Heritage Renewal Program has. An Artist in Residence program does all this. It involves people accessing it. It involves the community being involved, and it also provides a new cultural outlet for our community. Very exciting. The discussions with this project have now extended to include Arts Northwest, Tamworth Aboriginal Lands Council, along with New South Wales Transport. Alistair Noble, who's a professor at UNE, said that this type of support for creative practice is somewhat lacking in our region, and this project will be both influential and beneficial. Of course, it's not our building, but Transport New South Wales is determined to embellish it for our community's experience and education. The Transport New South Wales will manage the restoration program, and the timeline discussed was for the project to be well in progress before mid-2022. So for the benefit of our community, I'd really encourage support of this project. One, so that a significant heritage listed building in our community is restored, and two, that our cultural community has the benefit of having the input of artists in residence to both embellish the cultural life of the community, but also to give the community opportunities to express their arts.
Thank you. Any councillors wish to speak against the motion? Any councillors wish to speak in support? Councillor Impey.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I agree with everything that Councillor Wilson has already stated. This it was a weekend and a busy weekend, so this was the item in the agenda that made me feel warm and fuzzy again. I particularly was interested in the mention where it talks about transport for New South Wales will determine final use for each, i.e. the station's master's house and the West Tamworth Railway Station was mentioned. So I think there's a real opportunity through the success of the master's house for the potential for a funding source of various descriptions to look at what's happening with the master's house and maybe think, well, yeah, that West Tamworth Railway Station is a building worth saving, and it is part of our cultural heritage. In fact, I think it was the railway station that was built here before the main railway station on Marion Street, something like 3 years before, I think. So there's a real opportunity with the success of the master's house, and I'm quietly confident that something might be.
Thank you. Any further comments, Councillor Tickle?
Yeah.
Yes, I'm just up to comments now. We have no speakers against. So you're welcome to make comment.
I'll make a comment, Rob. Thank you. I certainly support the recommendation and what an opportunity for a government department to be offering to pay to restore the building. Unless I've missed it in the report, I'm not sure what the cost might be. I wonder if they know themselves. It will come at a cost, but it's fantastic that they're doing that, and also the number of groups that have come out in support of it as well. It shows strong community support to restore the building and also for the use as an artist in residence building. Of course, we have artists in residence in many areas, and they add a lot of atmosphere to a place, as well as providing a place for various artists to go and work. Many of them have open days and you can go and view the art, so it also creates another cultural opportunity for tourism, and of course the heritage aspect speaks for itself to be able to restore that. And I said, well, this government money's going to do it, well, we should be in there and accept that.
Thank you. Any further discussion, councillors? If not, I'll put the motion. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Motion is carried. Item 8.1, move Councillor Webb and Councillor Maxwell, thank you. Councillor Webb, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Just a quick couple of words, Mr Mayor. It's great, in this particular business paper and many before this one, there's always things that we're trying to do to make the community a better place to live in. The only way we can do that is by also supporting income generating projects. So the design of this particular and the work that's got to be done there to get the Global Gateway Park into the next stage is just so vitally important, because that's one of the projects that is going to be income generating, it's going to be job creating into the future, and they're the sort of things that we need to be happening as well as the other stuff that actually makes the town a better place to live in.
Thank you. Any councillors wish to speak against? Any wish to make comment? If not, I'll put the motion. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Motion is carried. Item 8.2.
David.
Move Councillor Betts and Councillor Inglis, thank you. Councillor Betts, do you wish to speak to the motion? Any councillors wish to speak against? Any councillors wish to make a comment? If not, I'll put the motion. Those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Motion is carried. Item 8.3. Councillor Betts?
He's leaving.
Sorry, Councillor. Move Councillor Betts and seconded Councillor Wilson, thank you. Councillor Betts, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Yes, Mr Mayor, I'd like to move the motion just with one minor change if I could. Item 1, instead of the installation of no parking signs between 8 AM and 4 PM on school days in Brisbane Street adjacent to 1.7, if we could change that with the seconder's permission, monitor parking compliance adjacent to 147 Brisbane Street and report back if non-compliance occurs.
Seconder was Councillor Wilson.
Yes.
That's fine. Okay.
Can we amend that? So it was the second dot point under approved in the point one,
Yeah.
monitor, you're just changing where it says the installation of.
Yeah.
We're replacing that with monitor, was it, councillor Betts?
Yes, monitor parking compliance adjacent to 147 Brisbane Street and report back if non-compliance occurs.
Okay, councillor Betts, do you wish to speak to the motion?
No, Mr Mayor.
Any councillors wish to speak against? Councillor Inglis?
Not to get out, Mr Mayor, but comment on the minutes if
Yes,
before you put
happy
it.
to, thanks. Yes.
Mr Mayor, this is Curtis Close with the parking issue. As you know, we, a couple of meetings ago anyway, sent it back to the traffic committee because they wanted to have no parking on both sides of the entire cul-de-sac. There's a couple of questions. One, how did we get to that position where that has to be the case? And we said at that point, no, we'd like to see some alternatives. And I see in the minutes our alternative is to find some parking on our land out the back of one of the properties there for some additional. Well, okay, who authorised that? And where is the reporting back in relation to the ability to have some parking on the street? For us to have no parking down both sides of the entire cul-de-sac, I don't know what the purchasers of properties would know about that or feel about that when the signs go up. It hasn't been approved. We sent it back to the traffic committee. So I guess asking Councillor Betts, when are we going to get some information on that? Because at an absolute minimum, there should be at least some opportunity as part of that cul-de-sac at some point, at least on one side of the road in a particular section, to have some parking, because you can guarantee that those businesses will see that as useful. Just coming up with a private car park for one of the property owners is I don't even know where that came from, but I do notice that in the minutes as part of the discussion. So all I'm saying, Mr Mayor, at the end of the day is the traffic committee needs to look at that to see, and as you know, it wasn't just that subdivision, it's also the one out on the old sale yard site as well.
Yep.
And I just don't accept that there isn't some way that you can have some on-street parking on one side in some portion of both those cul-de-sacs. For us to not look at that and look at that in a way where we're trying to be positive and provide that, I think would be a real failing on our part. What are you going to do at the one out at the old sale yards? What, we're going to find, separate little car park there as well? So, we need to handle this properly, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Webb.
Yeah, I'll make some comments along the same lines. We can't not have parking in that street. It's an industrial area. I was out there the other day for a meeting, and there were 3 cars and a truck parked on one side of the road for the duration of my visit out there, which was a few hours. And on the other side of the road, there was quite a number of vehicles. I think there was about 5 or 6 vehicles parked there. So we can't take that right away from those people to park in an industrial area in the street. So at a minimum, I mean, it's a botch up that the street's too narrow, but at a minimum we have to have at least parking on one side of the street.
Thank you. So the mover of the motion in Councillor Betts, is this, I guess, is there an understanding amongst us that this will go back to the traffic committee, or Mr General Manager, could I get some advice on how to proceed with this?
Mr Mayor, well, it's not actually part of the motion. So it's a matter that I think Councillor Inglis has identified that still needs to be addressed by the traffic committee, and then we haven't received a report back from the traffic committee for the reconsideration. Maybe Councillor Betts, I don't participate on this committee, so maybe Councillor Betts can comment on whether there had been any further consideration and whether it is going to be.
Look, thanks, Mr Mayor. Yes, there will be, and through you, Mr Mayor, you may want to call Mr Russell to maybe give some clarification. But that the engineers are going to go back and look at some further options, which includes that land adjacent to the obviously transport, but it's also looking at others. So through you, Mr. Mayor, you may want to.
I think that's explanation enough. So councillor, is there anything else you wish to speak to? Any more comments regarding the report? If not, I'll put that motion. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? The motion is carried. And item 8.4, councillor Webb. I'm sorry, councillor. So we have a motion. Councillor Webb has moved motion 8.4. We have a seconder, Councillor Wilson. Thank you. Councillor Webb, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Well, just to say, Mr. Mayor, that this study's done, it comes up with a report. There's some credible bodies there that will be involved in the preparation of that report. I think one of the things we've really got to be thoughtful about, that is how critical water supply is for us into the future. And as one drought comes, a wet period comes, there will be another drought into the future. So we need to make sure that we can have reports like this put together that can give us some ammunition to go to the government to talk about new strategies to make sure that we don't get into a situation like we did at the last drought where we were getting very close to the line of not having enough water, and we had people having to have 3-minute showers and not water their gardens and all those sorts of things. But as well as that, the irrigation industry was suffering, and so were the industries that produce all that protein over in our industrial area. So I think it's going to be vital for us to get this report put together by these professional bodies, and we are going to be able to use that report to support our argument with government for better water management and better water supply, and I think that's grossly important. That's so important for us into the future.
Thank you. Any further comments, or any councillors wish to speak against? Any further comments? If not, I'll put the motion. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? The motion is carried. Item 9.1. Move Councillor Inglis and Councillor Maxwell. Thank you. Councillor Inglis, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Only, Mr. Mayor, to reiterate my great sadness at the interest rates. Other than that, no.
All like all.
Any councillors wish to speak against the motion? Any councillors wish to make comment? If not, I'll put the motion. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? The motion is carried. Item 9.2. Move Councillor Inglis and Councillor Wilson. Thank you. Councillor Inglis, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Well, just a couple of inquiries, Mr. Mayor. As you know, I'm a big fan of operational expenditures. I noticed on page 604, the Heritage Awards, $10,955. What was that? It's obviously an over expenditure, but you would think we would normally budget for that one pretty regularly and easily, and so if I can get some info on that. And the an environmental planner, 80K, sounds about right. My question is, I see it's funded from restricted assets. That's interesting. I'm just curious about the strategy there, so I might get a bit of info on that. And I see the pilot facility, sale of a fire truck, 113K. Must have been a good truck.
Yeah, we'll take those on notice.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Any further comments, councillors? If not, I'll put the motion. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? The motion is carried. Item 9.3. With Councillor Webb and Councillor Maxwell. Councillor Webb, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I've been banging on about this for a while. We need to get this Fitzroy Street Plaza activated, and activated quickly. Probably a bit slower than I was hoping. I was hoping we would have had something happening there already. But it's great to see that we've got some activities lined up, and that we need to use that plaza for what it was designed for. So I'll be looking forward into the future next year. We get that street shut off and we can have some stuff happening there regularly on weekends. But this is a great step forward in the right direction, and I think these micro events will probably pick up, and I'm sure that the community of our city and outlying areas within the LGA will take advantage of that when they're in town.
Thank you. Any further comments? Councillor Mills?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Totally agree with Councillor Smith. It's been a long time coming, and it's something that's sorely needed because Fitzroy Street had a huge potential to really get the socialisation into the CBD and having plenty of events. This is a set of small steps, but I noticed in the traffic committee we've approved a 12-month blanket road closure on short notice, and that went through just went through the traffic committee. Also, the police and RMS and council totally supportive of that. And that will allow, as we move forward, to actually have impromptu events on very short notice. And I think we really need to push that activation in that Fitzroy Street area. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson?
Mr. Mayor, how many good reports have come up tonight? It's just, we've got sort of an overflow of good. This is an exciting project. It's really great to see Fitzroy Street activated. But it needs to be on a regular basis. There needs to be anticipation that if somebody says, let's go out, they will know that there's something happening down there. We haven't got our planning quite right, and it was so good to see the year-long Fitzroy Street closure happen, because that gives us an opportunity to actually create in there what needs to happen. One brief suggestion with the family nights, I noticed they're from 7 till 9 p.m. If you've got a few children in primary infant school age, they're just about famished by 7 o'clock and in poor spirits. So it might be worth bringing the family night back to 6 o'clock, because there'll be food places there, and you grab the kids and take them out and not have to feed them, and then all that. People are ready at 6 o'clock to take them out. I've also got one plea. Can we please name this area? I know Councillor Webb. What tonight's got to be, it's really got to me, I'm concerned. Councillor Webb said Fitzroy Plaza. Fitzroy Plaza is not what it is. We don't have a name for it. And we need a name that doesn't sound like a commercial enterprise or area. You know, when you think of Martin Place, I also call it Place, when you think of Martin Place, you think of an area. When you think of Plaza or Boulevard or something, you think of something else. So can we please decide on a name and market and promote it as a destination? You know, Fitzroy Street, it's the end of the street. Plaza, it's whatever. So I don't know whether it's worth making that as a matter arising, but if I could refer that to department for us to look at.
Councillor Wilson, could I suggest that we just defer that to the City Centre Working Group to consider a recommendation back to council? I think that would be an appropriate way to move forward.
Yes, I think that's superb, and we certainly still do need to look at physical embellishments. But once traffic's out of there and people learn to amend their CBD driving habits, I think that place will flourish.
Thank you.
As long as the guys keep the plants growing.
Councillor Tickle?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've just thought of the name, Martin Place, Fitzroy Place.
Yeah, Fitzroy
Just for
Place.
what it's worth. Well, I hope it might be worth something. I only just thought of it too. But thank you. This is great planning. And in fairness, we haven't been able to have anything much for the last 2 years. So this is a great step forward, and let's hope that we can keep on moving forward, and more restaurants or eateries will come along and want to open up and spill out into the Fitzroy Place. It will. As we know, eating venues always will attract people, and that looks busy. So well done formulating the report. When I know we've done the traffic management study on this, and thank you for that, because as you know, I've always been an advocate of having through traffic until we come to some other arrangement for CBD traffic, because it is not feasible to expect people to drive all the way along Peel Street to Brisbane Street to be able to turn right. It's just, we have parking along there, obviously people park in front of shops. So I'm very comfortable with this arrangement, that it will just be closed off on a needs basis. on the weekend. And the other thing too, which is great to see, there are very few vacant shops in the CBD, so there is a lot more foot and vehicle traffic through there. So there's a lot of things to consider with Fitzroy Place into the future.
Thank you. Any further comments, councillors? Councillor Eddy?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, in my opinion, this is the best CBD in regional Australia. It's well tree-lined, it's an attractive place to be, it's well paved, nice and comfortable, and I think it's just a matter of time before Fitzroy Place might match that bill. And the trees are growing nicely. I walk past those trees at least weekly when I'm in the CBD, when I manage to get away from school, and the trees are really growing nicely, and I think the staff should be given a really pat on the back for those, because I know there were some people who thought, oh, you're going to plant trees, it'll take years and years and years to grow, but they're growing well, and that's for people they're looked after.
Thank you. Any final comments, councillors? I think there's one thing we've missed here. I just like the piece about this being funded from current budgets, from operational savings, and that's the bit that I really like. Ms O'Connell, I think you're setting a lovely precedent there that we will look forward to future opportunities like this one. Councillors, I'll now put that motion. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? The motion is carried. And now, before I call for a motion to go into closed council to consider these confidential reports, I'll make an offer to any members of the public in the chamber. Do you have any matters you wish to have brought forward to open council, or any members of the council? If not, I'll thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Mandel, for your interest and attention and perseverance. This is a very different meeting tonight. Thanks for your interest. Councillors, we'll now take a motion to move If Jason might be able to open the door and let all those people back in.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Council, this report from the closed session of the ordinary council meeting held on the 26th of October 2021. In closed council, you considered 7 reports, and for each of those reports, you adopted the recommendations as printed in the business paper.
Thank you. Could we have a motion to receive? Councillor Maxwell and Councillor Empey, thank you. Those in favour? Against? Carried. And that brings our meeting formally to a close at 7.
8.
At 8.